Hi folks, my name is Jeremy Hudson and I'm with the Open Sky Group, and today I'll be showing you our enhanced client billing tool. Hopefully by the end of this session I've answered some of your questions around how you can leverage this tool to bill clients for activity that occurs within your warehouse and supply chain network. So without further ado, let's jump right in. The Enhanced Client Billing tool, as you can see here, is a web-based tool. This tool is intended to run in parallel to a warehouse management system. Effectively, what occurs is the warehouse management system will log activity as it occurs within the warehouse, and then we will take that activity, transfer it to the billing tool, and register charges against those clients at a defined and configured rate within the Enhanced Client Billing tool. So once we log in, it's worth noting, as I log in here, I won't spend time today talking through the permissions-based roles that are within the tool, but just note that everything you'll see today is configurable in terms of who and how someone can edit the information or see the information displayed on these screens. Today, I intend on breaking our session into really two parts. I want to show configuration, and then I want to show the operations portion of this software. However, before I do that, I'd like everybody to keep in mind that this tool is intended to be interacted with through the warehouse management system, which ultimately means most of the interaction with this tool is done in an automated fashion. Most of the users that interact with this tool actually have no awareness that they're interacting with it. They simply perform activity within the warehouse management system, and then we take that activity within the tool and charge that into transactions. And so ultimately, most of the users that are contributing information to this tool have no idea they're doing so. All they're doing is their day-to-day job as they do it today. The tool is intended to automate billing as much as possible to prevent your billing clerks, to prevent your financial department from having to go in and manually do these activities. So first, we'll walk through how to set up a client. Then we'll walk through how to set up and configure rates within this tool. And then finally, we'll segue to operations, where we'll talk through miscellaneous charges, reviewing invoices, and ultimately managing invoices within this tool. Let's start by setting up a client. When I navigate to my clients page, you'll notice there's several fields here that I can configure when adding a new client. Keep in mind, this is only necessary during the onboarding phase of logistics. So when we onboard a client, we configure simple things like the client's name and address, but we also can configure their contract date at which the contract will go into effect. The anniversary days, this reflects occasionally how often something is invoiced, every 15 days, every 30 days, etc. It can also influence charges that occur on a daily repeatable level. Additionally, we can also choose to charge certain admin fees, storage fees, etc. on the 15th, 30th of every month if desired by the operation. So there's significant configuration that goes into kind of recurring or standing fees associated with client warehousing. Additionally, we can also add payment terms for transparency on invoicing. We can set a send days, which is a delay in how often we send the invoice to the client. So for example, if you send an invoice to a client and you'd like 5 days to review that invoice prior to sending, the delay days entered here would be 5. Free days relates to storage charges. And so when we talk about storage fees within the warehouse, we can charge storage by number of locations occupied. We can charge storage by number of pallets in the warehouse at a given time. We can also charge storage on maximum number of pallets within the warehouse for a given period of time. And then ultimately, what we can do is also configure a number of free days to indicate if the product has been in the warehouse for less than X amount of days, we will not charge for those specific pallets. Keeping in mind, when you do see invoicing later, I actually reflect every pallet ID that's charged for during the storage fee process. And so clients will have full visibility of the pallets that they're being charged for, the product that's being stored on those pallets, etc. Additionally, we configure address information, an email address if we'd like to automate invoicing processes, and then importantly, we configure whether transactions require approval, whether we bill by a specific division, or whether we track that daily pallet count for storage fees. Additionally, We also can choose whether we'd like to email the invoice in an automated fashion or not. And so ultimately, you can leverage this tool to even generate and email invoices to your clients automated to prevent any kind of mix-up or delay in getting an invoice to your clients. And so this is really a main part of the configuration associated with adding a client. It's also worth noting, before I transition away from this topic, you'll notice I have 2 clients configured here. We can support multi-client warehouses. And so in the event that you have several clients within a single physical warehouse, have no fear, we can allow for several clients within that warehouse to be configured. And each one of those clients can have different configurations associated with storage charges, any type of rate within the warehouse, anything of that sort. And so all of that is certainly configurable and definable within the software itself. So now that we've added a client, let's transition to adding client-based rates. Within rate configuration, what we'll see here is the ability to add rates based on activity that occurs within the WMS. Now, I'll spare you all some of the technical details, but basically the key thing to know here is that this tool is intended to work in unison with your warehouse management system. It is not independent. It is dependent upon a WMS to feed information to the tool, and then the tool interprets that information and then charges a rate based on that interpretation. So, the rate itself, which is shown on my screen now, is going to have a rate ID and then the rate that is charged to the client. This rate is going to be multiplied by the unit of measure that's configured against the activity itself. So as you can see, these are highly configurable in terms of, for example, the unit of measure that can be charged. So for example, I have several clients that are charging per order entry, per order line on order entry, and per BOL print on outbound. More conventionally, where I see these leveraged is charging per pallet or per case on receiving, or charging per case pick, per each pick, and per pallet pick. And each one of those can have a different rate associated with it. And so I don't need to charge my clients one flat outbound rate. I can vary that rate based on whether this is an each pick, case pick, or pallet pick. And so all of that is configurable within this rate setup. And ultimately, we're going to map this rate to a charge code which is received from the WMS. And so in this example, I'm charging $2.13 per case of receiving. And as I see that receiving activity come over, I'm able to attribute it to handling. I can add a division here, which frequently maps to a GL code, as well as a comment, which will be reflected on the invoicing for easier translation by the client. And so this allows you to configure these rates. Additionally, I should note that you can also do this by item type and by item number. So if you have specific types of items in your warehouse that require more effort than others, and you'd want to be able to leverage that and charge the client more for those specific items. Something that comes to mind, for example, would be 55-gallon drums, or potentially repack items or hazardous items. You may want to increase the rate based on the MSDS that's required, etc. You can do that within this tool. And so you can simply add an item type. That item type comes from the WMS. When we see that item type on a transaction, we will multiply a different rate for those specific items, and that would be reflected on the client's invoices for visibility as well. Keep in mind, all of that is automated, so no action required by users whatsoever. This is simply data known by both systems, so we're able to translate that rate effectively. Now that we've configured rates, a few more notes before we move on to the operations portion of this. You'll see here I have several rates configured for client A. However, every single one of these rates are client specific. And so when we talk about rates, just know that number one, not every client in your warehouse has to be charged the same rate for the same activity. That being said, I also don't want anybody to quiver in fear over the idea of setting these rates up for every individual client. You can clone rates within this tool, which allows you to basically replicate an existing client's rates and then alter those rates as needed. So you would be able to, have a templatized client and then basically duplicate that client every time you onboard and simply change the rates when necessary. And so that's one piece that cuts down on this. I should also mention every rate that I show, and you may have caught this on the previous screen, every rate that I show does have an effective date and an end date. So in the event that you're incurring a rate increase for a client, you can set those up in advance, set those effective and end dates accordingly, and then those rates go into effect immediately upon reaching that date. And so it automates the process. It doesn't require you to set an alarm to wake up and change rates the day a contract is renewed. You can set that up in advance, have that configured, and then sit back and relax and allow the system to do the work. So keep in mind that's a feature as well. So these are two main configuration pieces. Next, we'll transition to the operations portion of the software. All right, now that we've talked through the configuration, now let's transition to the operations side of the software. So next, we're going to talk about creating charges. In the event that you have a miscellaneous charge, so I've talked through the fact that this product is certainly intended to be automated. However, there's going to be instances that a client calls and says, can you repackage something for me? Something was mispackaged from a manufacturer. Can you rework some of my product? Can you inspect some of my product? Something of that sort, some kind of miscellaneous, unexpected request. You can come into the tool and create a charge specific to that request. You can put in relevant information such as notes, any of the relevant information that may help the client understand what they're being billed for at the end of the month. And then you can also associate a rate and a quantity associated with that charge. So I can create a charge for $500 for a one-time rework fee, for example. And so all of that's logged, a user ID is logged against it. Once again, this is all permissions based. So this would be an activity that would typically be done by a supervisor or a manager within your operation to allow you to capture these miscellaneous charges that occur throughout operational activity. Once you create these transactions, the next step is reviewing them and then ultimately generating an invoice. Next, what we'll show is transaction approval. So I mentioned your miscellaneous charges. We also have all of the automated charges that are being generated by integration from the WMS. And ultimately, what that ends up turning into is a transaction. So as you can see here, I've got a nice, clean transaction. This is my demo instance, so I try to keep it relatively clean. What I'm able to do here is review everything that was associated with this. So I have a shipping charge that was generated by this specific RF, by this specific user ID. I can see the load number, the quantity that was handled, the rate that was charged, and the total rate that was charged based on the quantity. And I'm able to review this transaction, approve it, unapprove it, or void it if necessary. And all of those steps are available to me until I've generated the invoice. And so I've got full visibility of this. And then the next step is, once I'm done vetting these activities, which can be done en masse, I can come over and create the invoice itself. So I can review client A's log charges and then ultimately generate the invoice accordingly. Once the invoice is generated, I see that within my Manage Invoice section. This is where I have past invoices that show the total amount that was billed to the client and the due date associated with that amount that was billed. So as you can see here, I've billed $66 on this invoice. These can be separated and distinguished by a department number or a specific GL code if desired by the client. And we've got reporting that that is built in and exportable for transparency and delivery to the client. So as you can see, I've got my summary invoice here. This lists all the relevant invoice information such as due date, etc., and a summarized charge. And so by summarize, what I mean is we're not showing individual pallets, we're not showing individual dates, we're showing simply summarized charges for the month by the activity that's occurred, and that's shown in this charge code. So as you can see, this one's relatively simple. It was simply 3 pallets multiplied by a rate of $22 to amount to a $66 charge to the client themselves. Additionally, we do have the invoice detail. Now the invoice detail is going to show all those individual transactions. So I've got a nice export of this here where we can see specific load numbers, specific pallet IDs that were handled, specific devices and user IDs that interacted with these transactions, as well as the amount charged for each individual transaction. And so one thing to note here is this is an extremely granular tool. We want to give your clients all the visibility we can to understand why something is being charged and when it was charged and how it was charged. And so have no fear of not having data where it needs to be or having an inability to respond to clients when in the event that a transaction is disputed. You certainly have all of the historical backing, all of the historical information that you would need to be able to really trace back that exact activity to a receipt, an outbound load, etc. So you'll have all of that kind of in your back pocket in the event that you're interacting with your client in relation to these invoices. And so ultimately, what we've been able to do today is we took you through the configuration, the adding of a client, the maintenance of a rate, the setup of a rate, and then we switched over to operations. We talked through the creation of charges, we talked through the managing of your invoices and the review of your invoices. So next, I'd like to talk through some quick Q&A, but before I do that, I'd just like to thank everybody for their time today, and let's segue to our Q&A section. Thank you. Some of the frequently asked questions around this product include things around timeline, and so let's talk about timeline of both implementation and new client setup. The timeline of implementing this product honestly ranges based on the complexity of clients, but normally the timeline we're seeing for our implementations is roughly 6 to 8 weeks to get the product installed, all the way up through configured and logging charges. Keep in mind, this isn't something that has to be implemented with your WMS at the same time. So if you're in the midst of a major WMS implementation, it's not an additional feature you need to take on at this time. It is something that can be implemented afterwards. It is something that is relatively flexible in terms of implementation and testing, keeping in mind this is a reporting tool, and so ultimately there wouldn't be an impact on getting orders out the door. We're simply logging activity as it occurs within the WMS, which should allow you to test the system, install the system, and implement this system in line with ongoing activity. And obviously our team is heavily engaged in making sure we thoroughly test in your developmental test environments in advance, and we feel comfortable as you move this into a production environment. Ultimately, once this is installed, the unit testing is relatively simple. The user acceptance testing remains simplified. And keep in mind, we want to configure this software with your team, which brings me to new client setup. New client setup, quite honestly, I've seen done within a matter of hours. You saw when I did the demonstration that clients are relatively easy to add, along with the ability to clone existing client rates. And so once you set up the tool for the first time, really it's simply a matter of replication for additional clients. That goes relatively smoothly, and the key is during the implementation process, we try to do that in partnership with your team. We do not want to configure on our own. We like to make sure your team is either hands-on or over our shoulders throughout the configuration and setup process to enable you to fire up additional clients as needed, or even fire up additional warehouses. Keep in mind, OpenSky Group has several clients that have been running this tool for years, and they've added additional warehouses and additional clients several times without any need for configuration support from our team. Additionally, a frequent question I get about this software is, how do you take upgrades, and do we upgrade the software? So, that's a great question. We do upgrade the software, and we do support the software. This is something where, keep in mind this product, I love the origin of this product. This wasn't a product that was designed and then sold to a third-party logistics company. This is a product whose origin is based out of need. We were implementing third-party logistics companies' warehouse management systems. They continuously asked for the ability to register and log billing charges. So we worked in partnership with 3PLs to understand what they really wanted the product to do, and then we delivered a product capable of doing that. And so I'm proud to say this is a product that was based off of what 3PLs needed, and it's not instead a product that 3PLs need to fit into. What that means is, as we work with more and more 3PLs, we continue to discover additional uses of the product, additional billing mechanisms, and as we find those, we implement those into a base product supportable solution. So as you grow with this product, we are confident that the product will grow with you as well. So I'd like to thank everybody today for participating in this demonstration, this virtual Q&A session, and I'm excited that you were able to see the product. Obviously, if you have more questions and you'd like to see more of this product, please reach out to the OpenSky Group contact listed on your screen. We're excited to tell you more and hopefully spend more time demonstrating. Keep in mind, this demonstration could have definitely been much longer. We could have gotten into much more detail. I like to keep things short for this show. However, in the event that you want to see more or understand how it would work with your specific operation, please reach out to us. We're excited to speak with you about our billing tool and excited to learn more about your operation. Thank you.